Welcome everyone to this Ex Libris training session on Leganto. My name is Kevin Lane-Cummings. I'm a training services consultant with Ex Libris. Also here is Jesse Ransom, who is a teaching and learning product specialist. And this is the second training session in the series on Leganto on becoming an expert. And so today's session, session 2, is about bulk rollover of reading lists. And this is, as I say, the second of 6 sessions in the Become an Expert class series. Next month, exactly next month on March 17th, we'll talk about digitization and copyright, just an overview of those subjects because they are huge subjects, but they would deserve at least several sessions, but we'll give you one. We'll also talk about optimizing the instructor experience. That'll be in mid-April. And then you can see the rest of the sessions for the rest of the quarter, rest of the first half of the year, really. If you hadn't registered for these sessions by going to the Knowledge Center, maybe you got a link from one of your colleagues or something like that, the place to go to register for any of these sessions is in the Ex Libris Knowledge Center, and you go to the Leganto product, and then within there is the training section. Within that is the webinars section, and that's where this series is, Become an Expert in Leganto. That is also that page. Once you get to that place, besides registering for these upcoming sessions, that's where you can look at the recordings of previous sessions, including last month's session, which was about automating library processing of reading lists. And it's also where you can download this PowerPoint presentation that I'm showing here. It's a PDF of this presentation. And the reason you might want to do that even after today's session is because there are some links to documentation and training that might be helpful. And you could see those links and work with them. So today's agenda is basically 2 sections. And really, it's just one. The second part, the bulk rollover workflow, is where we're going to spend most of the time today. But before we do that, I want to give you an overview of 3 different options for reusing your reading lists. One of the options is bulk rollover, which is what we're going to talk about today. But there are 2 other options. They also could have entire training sessions in themselves, but the documentation on the Knowledge Center will help you if you choose to use one of those. But I want to show you these other 2 so you can compare and contrast with the bulk rollover sessions, bulk rollover workflow that we're going to do today, so you can make an educated decision on which is the best for your institution. Just a reminder, if you do have questions during this session, please post them in the WebEx chat and address them to all panelists. All right. Let's talk about bulk rollover. We will spend much more time on the rest of the session talking about it, but just to compare bulk rollover to those other 2 ways of reusing reading lists, let me just briefly talk about bulk rollover. First of all, in this case, the library, and really the library staff, rolls over the reading lists all at once in bulk using a tool in Alma called the course loader. That rollover process will create a copy of each of the old lists and then makes them new lists and attaches each of those lists to the new courses for the new academic term. There are some great advantages to doing bulk rollover. We'll get to see how these are later in the session as we go through them. But one of the first ones is it's pretty easy for instructors because the instructors don't have to really do anything. When they access Leganto using your learning management system, the instructors will simply be taken to the new rolled over version of their reading list, and they can make any changes to it as needed for the new term, the new academic term. Library staff gets to configure or choose how to configure how the data from the previous reading lists will map into the new reading lists. For instance, do you need to duplicate the copyright records, any tags and statuses that go along with those old reading lists, any discussion threads, any notes. Anyway, you all as a library staff get to decide which bits, which parts copy over to the new lists. You can also set the publication status and the list status for the old and the new reading lists with some easy configurations that I'll show you today. Finally, information about all those previous reading lists, those old reading lists, is preserved in Alma, and the analytics data stays available so that you have a historical record. Or if you need to compare reading lists from one term to the next, there's the old lists are still in there, and you can do a compare with the new reading lists. there are, in fact, some disadvantages. There's some reasons that some institutions choose not to do the bulk rollover process. For one thing, it does require use of that course loader integration profile. Some institutions don't choose to use it. I'll show you how to do that. That will actually be quite a bit of the time today, as we're going to talk about that process of using that course loader integration profile. But you do need to use it. That's the way the bulk rollover works. Also, you must have sufficient data at your institution to map the old course codes to the new course codes. If you don't, if that's not information that's passed around enough, it's going to be pretty hard to do this bulk rollover. And your institution, at your institution, the staff in the library has to really take a deep consideration of the timing of the rollover. In other words, when will you roll over the old lists to the new term? You don't want to do that too early when the previous term is still going on and students are still accessing those reading lists, but you don't want to do it too late because that would leave the instructor too little time to prepare the list for the new term. So those are some disadvantages of using this bulk rollover process. Okay, if that's not good for you, if you don't really like those bulk rollover disadvantages, perhaps you will like the instructor rollover. So this is a different workflow. In this case, the instructors, sometimes the library staff, are the ones who roll over the reading lists. In this case, the reading lists are rolled over one by one. And ideally, it would be the instructors, which is why we call it the instructor rollover process, but it could be the library staff coordinating it with the instructors. But the most important point of this process is that each individual reading list is rolled over by itself, not in bulk with a whole bunch of reading lists. Just like the bulk rollover process, this instructor rollover process creates a copy of the previous reading list from the previous term, links the new copy to the new term of the course. And you might guess there's already some advantage to this, and that is the instructors can roll over the lists anytime they want to. Some instructors might be done with the reading list earlier and they can roll it over, get it ready. Others want to wait till the little break between terms and roll it over then. It's up to the instructor. It all gets taken care of by themselves because they're going to do it when they want to. The instructor can define which aspects of the reading list should be copied or reset. They get to decide if particular notes or particular settings or statuses and things like that should be copied over, or should they be cleared and start fresh. The library staff doesn't need to worry about mapping course information from term to term because the instructor chooses what course in your learning management system that is connected to, that the reading list is connected to. And you at the library staff doesn't need to use the course loader at all. Some nice advantages to that. There are some disadvantages, and you might have already guessed that one of them is you have to train those instructors. They have to know how to do the rollover. And they actually have to do it. They're the ones who are now obligated to do the training. Now, if you don't have the instructors do it and it's staff doing it, library staff doing it, but doing it one by one, then it's a lot of effort by those library staff members because they have to do each rolling over each reading list one by one instead of in bulk with a quick setup. If that's not good for you either, there is one more option for reusing reading lists from one term to the next, and that is resetting the reading lists. In this case, the reading list itself is reused. It's not copied. It's just reused in the new term and connected to the course for the new term. The previous term's reading list is cleaned up. The student discussion is cleared. The instructor usage reports are reset. Everything's cleared up, erased, so that it can be used in the new term. There are some advantages to this. It's the simplest process. And it's really simple if you happen to use the same course codes, or if they're very consistent from one semester or one quarter to the next, one term to the next, that your reading list can just stay attached without a lot of complication. It's really simple to kind of press a button, everything gets cleared. The reading list just gets moved to the next course, the next course term. It doesn't require any additional work from the instructors, and just a little bit of work by the library staff. And there are fewer lists sitting in Alma that need to be managed because there's only one copy of a list associated with a course. You don't have all those old course lists, those archived from months and years ago sitting in Alma. There's just the current ones. some great advantages to that. But there's a couple of really big disadvantages to reading lists being reset at the end of an academic term. And one of them is you don't have preserved historical versions. You don't have a record of what it used to be. So if citations are added or removed from a reading list from one term to the next, there's no record of that. There's no, it won't show. And maybe your institution has some kind of requirements that you keep a version of the reading list as it was at the end of each term to show what your expectations were of the students and so forth. That's gone when you do a reset of the reading list. Also, the reset option may require the library to manually add, remove, or change course codes from one year to the next. So if you don't consistently use course codes, the same course codes from one term to the next, someone in the library is going to have to be doing some work about that. And finally, generally you can't reset copyright information. Although there's an option to reset the CLA information for institutions that use CLA, and those of you who are, you know what I'm talking about. But generally, it's a little bit more challenging to deal with the copyright situation when you do a reset. All right, so those are the 3 different options for using reading lists. We're just going to talk about the bulk rollover workflow. As I say, for many people, this is the preferred method of using reading lists, reusing reading lists, but many institutions don't do it because it can feel very complicated. So I'm going to help walk through it today. First, I'm going to give you a detailed explanation, or really more steps, all the individual steps that it's required in the bulk rollover. The first one of which is actually creating an import file. So we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. And then I'll show you how to configure the course loader, that import profile course loader for the course loading. And then we run the rollover courses job and make it work with a small set of courses and reading lists that I have. All right, so let me give you this detailed explanation of the bulk rollover process, which we were introduced to a few minutes ago, but now we're going to get into more detail. The major steps, you've already kind of got a sense from that agenda. The first thing you have to do is create a file that the course loader is going to use. And the key elements of this file is it maps the old courses to the new courses. And you're going to create one of these files each academic term. The second step is you configure the course loader integration profile. We'll also do that today. You probably will only have to do that once, and then it will be reused every term when you're going to do the rollover. There might be minor configuration changes, but for the most part, that is the effort that you're going to see and that I will go through today. Doesn't need to be do very often, or if it's very minor changes. Then you run that course loader job on the course loader file, step number 1. What that process does, that job, it duplicates, it copies each reading list, and then the status of the old list can be changed. Maybe it becomes draft, maybe it becomes archived, something like that. It very quickly takes care of that. We've got the new one is the new status. The new reading list will have this course status of draft and so forth. And then the instructor will access the new reading list, the copied reading list, from the learning management system. Some people are concerned that this process is hard, and I wouldn't call it hard, I would call it complicated. But my colleague Jesse, who's on the call right now and who will be answering your questions in the chat if you have any, has been monitoring the Leganto listserv since it was founded years ago, and this rollover process is an ongoing topic of conversation there. When she was searching for data on rollover in that listserv, there were hundreds of emails where people were trying to deal with this process. So apparently some people find it to be complicated, at the very least hard possibly. But and I can understand why it might seem kind of scary, because it's a really big job, especially if you have lots of reading lists, and there are some big ramifications, big effects when you run this process. For one thing, the data can be very, very complicated. When you're mapping course codes from one term to the next, you could be dealing with dozens of codes or even hundreds of course codes that have to be correct. Also, as you're going to see in a minute, there's a lot of configuration options when you're setting up the import profile. I'm going to try to help you out by showing you which ones are key to the process and which ones are just helpful, so that there aren't as many unexpected surprises and so that you know the implications of those configurations. Also, there's essentially no undo button. There isn't a really easy way to revert all of the rollover changes if something goes wrong. And it can be done in certain circumstances, but I suspect this is a big reason that some institutions are reluctant to use the rollover process. But because a lot of institutions think this would be the way to go if they could manage it, if they could be not so concerned about having to revert things, I want to help you make it less scary. I want to help you make it work. So I'm going to give you some tips to help reduce some of those concerns, to help make it work for you. And one of them is, don't do the whole thing at once. Test it on just a couple of sample courses first. That's how I'm going to do it today. Just a couple of courses, see if it works. Confirm using the job report on that import profile job to make sure that the lists were created, the new lists, the old lists were archived, or whatever the process is supposed to be. And if it's something wasn't quite right, it didn't work in that little test, you just delete the new courses, you change the configuration, you try it again. That's a trick to getting that, because that configuration file or configuration system for the course loader is kind of a permanent thing. I mean, once you set it up, you can just keep reusing it. It gives you a chance to get it right with a small sample of courses. Then take a deep breath and jump in and run it for the entire set of reading lists. So that is a more detailed explanation of the bulk rollover workflow. I'm going to start moving into actually kind of stepping through how that's going to happen by creating an import profile file that we're going to use to define things for the course, for the rollover. So what I need to do is switch to my file that has already been created. Now, I've got this in Excel. It just makes it easier to look at. When we actually have to load it into the system, it's going to be a text file, but it just makes it easier to look at so you can see this. Now, this file has got a lot of columns. In fact, if you're really paying attention, you'll see I've hidden a bunch of columns that just aren't really important for our demonstration purposes. But in between here, there are a lot of columns. What I do want to show you is that we're just going to do it really quick with two courses. And these are the two courses, this English 120 course and this History 120 course, this World Literature course and World History course. Okay, just two courses that we're going to roll over. It's going to create the new courses and map the old reading lists to these new courses, and that's what's happening in this file. Most of the fields in this file have to do with the incoming course, the new course. So if you're using that course loader already, this shouldn't be too surprising. Not all of the fields are even mandatory. I've highlighted the mandatory fields in yellow just so you can see them. And I'll tell you why this one is sort of yellow, the old course section. I'll tell you that in a minute. But you do need to have information in each of those mandatory fields. And later I'm going to show you where to find an explanation of every single field here that you need to have. Some of the fields look like they maybe could just be a text field. You could just type in whatever you want, like the academic department field. But the course loader is looking for the code of the academic department, not a text description or name. So make sure that when you enter in, for instance, this field, that you put in the department code as it's listed in ALMA and not just a textual description of it. There's a few fields that have dates. For instance, the start date and end date is in here. And the format you use for this dates is important. And if you look closely, you're going to see we've got day, month, year as our format for our dates. They need to be consistent throughout this entire list, every row. And make sure you're remembering that format, because we need to do a setting in the actual import profile that checks to see which date format you're using here so it gets it right. I should mention that if this file has any mistakes, there's different things that are going to happen depending on which field the mistake is in. If it's a field that's not mandatory, like section ID or term or something like that, a mistake in one of those fields is going to be ignored and the field will be left blank. The course will still be created because if it's not mandatory information, the import profile doesn't care. But if it's a mistake in a mandatory field, like if we did something wrong with the title or the course code or anything like that, or the processing department, then that whole row will be ignored. It will not roll over that course. Because most of these fields are about the new course that it's going to be rolled into, I will point out which fields are not part of the new course. These three right here. We've got the operation. This is what process is going to happen. In this case, it's rollover, because you can use the course loader for other options here. You can use this system to delete a course or update a course. We're just going to be rolling it over. So that's the code that we put into the operation field. Also, the old course code. I'll come back to that in a second. And then we have the old course section. This is not necessarily relevant for Leganto, but it's possible you're using this as a way to keep course codes unique. So if you are, then it is a mandatory field. If you're using course sections in Alma at your institution, you'll need to supply the right combination of course code and course section to apply to the courses in your institution. If you don't use sections in your institution, then this is not a mandatory field. Okay, back to this old course code. Often the course code is in your learning management system and it's similar from one term to the next, similar to what I have here. For instance, if you compare this course code, ENGL 120 underscore 2021-3, and here it is 2022-1. So you can see there's a consistency there. The ENGL 120 has been carried over, and then it's just got the kind of the suffix for the new course term. There is an option to have Leganto automatically update the reading list name. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it that way. So because of this, you may want to create a mapping based on a combination of the course codes, the course name, the course instructor, anything like that. That way you can always get the data out of Alma or Alma Analytics if you need to pull the existing course codes, whatever you need to do to get these course codes so that they can be consistent going forward. At the end, the last column here, reading list name, I left this one in because what happens here is different depending on some settings that we're going to see. If you don't put anything in here, don't put a reading list name, then Leganto will try to just copy over the reading list name from before. If you put in a name here, if you give the reading list a name, the reading list name here will copy over. It will write over the reading list name. There is also an option to have Leganto automatically update the reading list name. For instance, if you're using the reading list name contains the term of the academic year, then you can have Leganto automatically update that for the new term. And I'll show you that in just a minute. So once you build this file, and again, I'll show you where to find the information that goes into this file, but once you build it, and you've got it, like I say, it seems to work best, it's more convenient here in Excel, but it can't be an Excel file that gets loaded into the special import profile system. You have to have a tab separated text file. So we have to save it as a different type of file. So I'm going to save a copy, and I'm going to choose right here, I'm going to choose in the dropdown what kind of file, and I want a tab separated, a tab delimited text file. So I'm going to save it as that. It exports it just as a text file, and we're done here with this file. The next thing that is going to happen actually is this file needs to go into the FTP server, wherever that is. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So back to the agenda. Now we've created the import file. It's time to configure the course loader integration profile. To do that, I need to be in Alma. So I'm going to switch my browser here to Alma and log in. Now, actually, before we even go into the integration profile, I need to talk about that reading list name. Where we could have Leganto automatically update the reading list name, because that's in a little different place. To do that, here in Alma, you have to go to the configuration menu, the Alma configuration menu, and Leganto configuration right here. And what we're looking for in the general section here is field normalization. And there's actually only one item on the mapping table for field normalization, and it's the list name rollover. So one of the tricks to setting up your system is to, for instance, put an expression, like in this case, we might have last year, we had all of our reading lists have the name 2021 attached to the end of the reading list because it was last year's reading list. And we could say replace that with 2022 for this year. So this is a way to have the reading list have a name, but the name is got the date of the academic term or academic year and gets updated as it rolls over. So it's easy to see which list we're looking at. Are we looking at last year's list? Or are we looking at this year's list? And by having this set up this way, and I'm going to save that, it's already built into the process. So when we run the bulk rollover job, that will happen and the reading list names will get changed. As long as we left this reading list name field empty. Remember, if you put in the reading list name here, that will take charge, that will overwrite anything and become the new reading list name. Okay, now it's time to finally get to the course loader integration profile. And it is also here in configuration. This one is on the general menu down here. And we're looking at external systems and integration profiles. There are lots of different integration profiles here for many different purposes in Alma. So what we really want to look at is the one specific to today's project, which is a course loader type. So I'm going to use this filter to just see the course loader types. You'll see we built some. By the way, this we're looking at is a test environment. It's got kind of a weird set of data, so things won't look quite like yours at your institution, but the process is the same, the workflow is the same. And you can see some course loaders we've built here. You might actually end up building several different course loaders for different purposes, for different academic years or things like that. I'm going to actually build a new one. So we're going to add an integration profile, kind of start it from scratch so you can see how that process works. Because if you haven't done this before, this might be how you have to do it, is build a new one from the beginning. Give it a code, and really this doesn't matter. It's just whatever is helpful for you. I'm just going to call it my test. And I'm going to give it the same kind of name, test course rollover. And what type of integration is it? It is a, oops, I'm not spelling very well today, excuse me. It is a course loader integration. So we're going to switch that over and it pops up a few extra fields here, including where is the file? Where is the Excel file, or really the text file that I created? And it has to be on an FTP system that you have configured beforehand. So if you haven't already tried configuring FTP setups at your institution, you have to do that before you even get started here so that they will appear on this list. We've got a whole bunch of different ones. I'm just going to use this Ex Libris one. But whatever system you use, that will automatically then have all the login communication and things like that are necessary for it. Then system, it's also a required field here. System is at your institution, the source for your data. Let me show you some examples. It could be the course management system. It could be the student information system. Whatever it is, because this is a training institution, we're using fake data, so we just use the other selection, but you can see all the different kinds of things that have been set up, kind of systems that have been set up, and hopefully you'll find what you have at your institution. That's just a setup. I can give a description of the system here. I could give a description of the profile here for other people at my institution to understand what this is for. And then I click next. And then we have the big page of the course import configuration. This is a long page of settings. And this is one of the places folks get a little bit intimidated by this process. I am not going to talk through every single option because, first of all, it'd probably be extremely boring. But most importantly, there is documentation about this. You can get help much more simply and much more detail than I can give you here in a short class. The place to go is the upper right corner, the help button, and choose help for this page. That opens up the Ex Libris Knowledge Center, and if it works, it usually jumps directly to the integration profile page. It didn't do it because I'm logged in as an editor on that system. Let's see if I can get it to bounce back to the integration profile page. Here we go. And the integration profile that we're doing This is where it'll end up when you do it. Go down here to course loader, and then it says configuring course loading. Opens up a new page in the Knowledge Center, and configuring course loading, which is what we're doing. We scroll down this documentation page, and here, for instance, is course loader fields. That's the spreadsheet we were working on. You might recognize some of these examples for the headers in that Excel spreadsheet we're working on. So if you need to know what's in there, which ones are mandatory, what are the values that are allowed, and things like that on that spreadsheet, on that course loader file, this is the place to get all the details on that. Then scroll down a little further and you'll see a screenshot of the page we were just looking at, the course import configurations, and right below those is all of the fields and all of the configurations and settings and what they do, and how they do it. So for details, go here to the documentation. As I say, to save you some time and to really be as helpful as I can for you, I'm going to instead talk about the configuration settings that are the most important ones, or where I can suggest a choice. I can give you a best practice. The documentation is extremely agnostic, let's say. It doesn't give strong opinions, it just tells you what there is. But hopefully I'll give you some suggestions that actually the way most people do it, or here's why you would choose one or the other. Okay, the first parameter right out of the gate is the active parameter. That means, is this course import profile active or not? You might keep it inactive so that no one can use it at your institution until you're done setting it up. So I'm going to make it active just so it's available when I'm done. The next field is the input file path. This is the place in that FTP server where you want the profile to grab your spreadsheet. Well, your text file that used to be a spreadsheet. So you'd fill out this path. I'm not going to do it because I'm actually going to load it today, but this is the place you show that path. Okay, then we start dealing with some actual parameters that have to do with delete courses, We're not doing that, so we don't need to worry about that. This profile can be used to delete courses. It can be used to do overriding and things like that, and we'll see. But these two, we don't need to do it. The first one that really affects us is this one here. Add instructor role to users. That terminology is a little bit confusing. What it is saying is if you check this box, then anytime in the file, let's go back to the file, that you see that that finds instructor, and here it's going to be the instructor is going to, that's got to be the Alma username there. Anytime it finds that, the system will make sure that this person, this user, has the instructor role in Alma. That's important so that they can go and edit that reading list and do whatever they need to do. Now, most of the time it's going to be fine because they will already have it. That users will already have it. But this just makes sure that they have the instructor role on all those users that are listed as instructors in the spreadsheet. So that's why I do want to check that box just to make sure. We were talking about the date format in that spreadsheet. Here's the place we put it in. And this is the way the date format was set up in my spreadsheet: day, month, and then 4 characters for the year. Just make sure it matches. The next is some overriding parameters. And overriding parameters, this one, so forth, these are only needed if you already have the data in and you're just updating some courses. We're not updating courses, we are rolling it over, so we don't use these at all. We can skip all the way past the overwrite ones until you get to the rollover section of configuration. So the first one, rollover, on rollover, include archive lists. If you at your institution, if you archive old lists, you need to determine whether you want to include those in rolling things over. Most of the time, here's your hint, most of the time you wouldn't because you archive them when they're done. But in this case, I'm going to leave that unchecked because I do not want my rollover to include archive lists. The next one is, do I want to roll over? Do I want to delete existing lists when I roll things over? Usually you don't. Usually you want to keep them. That's why you're doing a rollover instead of like a reset. So we don't want to delete the existing reading lists usually. Rollover copy citation tags, rollover section tags. This depends on your system. At your institution, do you want to keep those kind of citation and section tags in the new copy or not? All right, the next one is a drop-down menu, the rollover of citation statuses. What do you want the citation statuses to be on the new lists? For instance, it could be copy, that's one option here, or it could be being prepared. So remember when a citation has a status of being prepared, that means it's still being worked on by either the staff at the institution of the library or the instructor and so forth. But if you're rolling over a citation, it's probably already been vetted, it's probably already been checked out. So you don't need to check it again. So if you want to be efficient, you just say, it's probably fine. Let's just copy it. Same with the reading lists. Those groups of citations, what do you want the status to be of the new reading lists? Right now, it's defaulting to being prepared. But again, that means we have to look at it again. Maybe just simple to say complete. If the instructor wants to work on it, they'll start working on it and they can change the status of it. Again, that's up to you how you have your process at your institution of these new reading lists, these copied new reading lists. Publication status also. Do you want this and the copyright approval status? Do you want this to be copy or draft? Do you want the rollover status to be copy or recalculated? The copyright status. Again, these depend on your process for dealing with copyright at your institutions. You should note that copyright dates are automatically reset as part of a rollover job. A DCS license type and status, if that's what you use, that is copied regardless of what it's set for. For CCC, if you use that copyright system, there's a separate job to renew copyright licenses. So keep that in mind when you're going through these parts. Double check those, check the documentation for what your best course is for these. We have the reading list creation mode. This is actually a little bit confusing, and I'll just tell you right away, you don't need to worry about this if you always have one reading list for each course, and each course has its own reading list. If that's how you do it, you don't have to put anything here. This field of settings is for the circumstance where you have one reading list used by many courses, more than one course, I should say. So let's imagine you had last academic term, you had course number 1, and you had its reading list, but you're rolling over that reading list to 2 courses this term, course number 2, course number 3, okay? If you set this to multiple, the way it is now, then on rollover, 2 reading lists are created. It copies the reading list from course number 1, and it puts 2 new reading lists, one at course number 2 and one connected to course number 3. So that single reading list becomes 2 reading lists because it's got 2 courses. On the other hand, if you say single on this dropdown, then 1 reading list is created. It will be associated with both course number 2 and course number 3. Again, if you just have one course each that a reading list is associated with, then you don't even have to worry about this. Just it doesn't matter what you put in here because it won't affect it at all. And that's, I think, for most institutions, that's the way it's going to be. But the option is there just in case. All right, the next one is rollover public notes, rollover private notes. Depends on how you use those note fields. And I should say student discussion as well. Most institutions don't want a copy of student discussion that's associated with their reading list. They want to clear that up for the new semester, the new term. Other institutions like to keep some information in the notes. But if you have temporary notes, if you have temporary information in those notes, then you probably don't want to copy them. I'm not going to copy student discussion because I want that to be fresh each quarter. The reading list owner, you may not want to do that. You may not want to change to reset that. I'm sorry, this is I got to keep track of this. It may or may not be the instructor, but you probably want to copy who is the owner so that they are responsible for the new list, unless you have big changes at your institution whenever this happens. Maybe at the end of the year, you want to strip that out, clear it out so you don't copy reading list owner, but quarter to quarter you do. Sending a subscription letter, send the owner a subscription letter. This just lets that owner know that they've been added to the reading list. It's a good way to let them know it's ready. So I'm going to check that box. reading list collaborators is the same kind of if there's collaborators who build a list, other people besides the owner. Do you want to reset the old list owners? Do you want to clear that out? You may not want to do that because you want to keep the record of who owned the reading list that's now been, old and archived and things like that. This one here, this one's pretty important. It says existing permalinks will point to the new list once that list is published. So right now, if your institution uses permalinks, and that's a common thing, that institutions have reading lists that are given a permalink so that that link can be used elsewhere in your institution. If you want those permalinks to then point to the new list automatically so that nobody has to go in and change all those different places, this would be a helpful way to do that. If you don't use permalinks, or if you actually want to make sure that it gets cleared and not used again, be sure to uncheck that box. Copying the syllabus, copy the assignee, who's the person at your institution's library staff who is responsible for these lists. If you usually just clear it out and you don't care who works on it, then you can just uncheck that. But if you like to, if you have staff in your library that is responsible for certain sets of lists, and you want that to be assigned, for the next academic term, be sure to click that, check that box. Copy only the newest list. Maybe you have older versions of a particular list. Maybe there was a couple of versions created over the course of an academic term, and you're saying only copy the newest one. This may be relevant if you're rolling over lists to the same course. Here's a couple other notes. We have instructor notes. We have library internal notes. If you use them and if you want them to carry over, check those boxes. This is a very interesting one. It can be kind of confusing. On rollover, copy the list as long as it was created before a certain date. So for instance, I might say only lists created before January 22nd. Now, why would I do that? Well, if you have kind of different processes going on, and maybe over the last week, there have been some lists that are already rolled over to the new term, and you don't want them to be rolled over again. You only want to catch the ones that were done or were worked on before the certain period of time. That's probably too far back. I probably should say, since we're kind of late in February, it's the 17th now, anything that's been done like in the last week, I'm going to assume that any list created in the last week were for the new term. And so I want to make sure that I only roll over lists that were created before the new term is getting ramped up here. So very, you kind of have to know what how your team does its work. On rollover, do you want to overwrite course instructors or keep the course instructors? And this is specifically with that file, that spreadsheet that we were looking at. If there are names in here, usernames in here in the instructor column, do you want Leganto Alma here to overwrite the old course instructors, whatever in that field, or keep the course instructors and completely ignore any entries? Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
You cut out for just a minute there as you were talking about, just as you started to flip over to this spreadsheet.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So the choice here for this on rollover dropdown has to do with whether you want Alma Leganto here to keep the course instructors that are in the old courses, or replace them, overwrite them with the instructors that are here in the spreadsheet, in this column of the spreadsheet. In other words, you could ignore this and just keep the old course instructors. So again, you have to have a practice, a policy. Either way is good, as long as you at your institution have a plan for that. I'm going to pretend at my institution that whatever's in the spreadsheet is the correct answer, the correct course instructor, and so we're going to overwrite whatever's in the old course and put that in the new course. This next one, this drop-down menu is what kind of visibility do we want? What visibility setting do we want for the old reading list. And our choices are all of the visibilities that we might have. Maybe our old reading list should become an archive, so that it's, that not visible anymore, not accessible anymore to the students and so forth, or we might choose one of these other ones. Here, this is an interesting choice because what you do here, you might do it based on how do you want the reading lists to be forever now, archived or something like that. Or here is a trick for you. If you're concerned about that not being able to undo everything, if something goes wrong and you want to undo it, and that's really hard, here's a way to make it a little less hard. Take a look at your options here for the visibility of the old reading list and pick one that you don't use. Like maybe at my institution, we never use anyone restricted. That's just not something we use. If I choose my old reading list to have a visibility of anyone restricted, something that's just not used, a visibility that's not used regularly, then I run the profile. Oh my goodness, something went wrong. I have to roll back. I have to take back what I did. All I have to do is find all of the reading lists that have this weird visibility, do a search for them, and I've got my set of reading lists that I want to switch back to make them use again, and then do the process of rollover. It's a little trick to help you undo things if you want to. And then once things go well and you're happy with everything, you just turn all those off to archived. It's easy to do a search for, again, that group of a strange visibility, all the reading lists that have this weird visibility, and then turn them into archive or whatever your long-term plan for old reading lists.
I'm going to jump in here. Another option or another way to think about this is you also have the possibility to just leave this blank, which will keep the old reading lists at whatever visibility they already had. So you may be tempted to change them to draft or archived at the end of the term. But if you end up publishing your reading lists to a lot of different types of visibilities, sometimes they're course students, sometimes they're anyone, whatever it may be. The other option here is to just leave this so the old reading lists stay at whatever they previously were. You can run the rollover job, check that it worked. Nothing will have changed about your old reading lists at this point. And then if you can see that the job worked correctly the way that you expected it to, you can also use the reading list bulk update job to then go and mark all of these as draft or archived. So that's another option as well here.
Thank you. Yes, I like that option. And then the last
entry. About to get to the good part here, I know.
And then the last one is scheduling. You have a choice of scheduling this. You could run it every day, every 6 hours, 4 times a day, if you want to run this job. And just automatically just grabs the file in that FTP. Not a lot of libraries choose to do that. Most libraries actually choose to run it manually, once a quarter, once a session, whatever. Okay, once it's done, we click save at the top. And it's going to require a path. Of course it does. Kevin's path, just to put something in there. It's too smart for my own good. And then we have the list of course loader profiles, including mine. And I'm going to pretend that I'm going to run it. Let's say that I've got this all set up and it's time to run it. So we are now on the last step of the bulk rollover workflow, is to run that course job. I didn't really set this up to do it, but if I had, I could edit this and take a look and make any changes that I needed to make to the configuration, because I'm actually going to, it's time to run it. Notice what's different down here at the bottom. I've got 2 new buttons. I've got run in report mode and run. Run in report mode in Alma, there's a lot of different times you'll see the report mode option. It can be really helpful as a way to test how you're set up, your configuration has worked. Here, not so much. The report mode, all it does is validate that file that you created. That text file, tab separate, used to be an Excel file. It's just going to check and make sure that the fields are correct across that top row. It doesn't going to tell you what the rollover file is going to do with the reading lists or anything like that. You actually have to run the job. And so you click run and run the job. And if you only have a couple of rows in that field, in that file, so a couple of courses that you're going to roll over, it should be pretty quick as a test. Where if you need to keep track of it while it's running, it is a job, so it will show up in your admin system when you can monitor jobs. I didn't do it, so it's not running right now, but this is the place where you could see it running in case it's going to take a while, and then when it's done, you can go take a look at it. And so I'm going to show you what happens after it's done. After you run this job, you can go to either the job report or to do in the profile here and look at the report and see how it did. So I'm going to actually take a look at one that was run a while ago. I'm going to look at the job history of this other import profile. And you can see the last time it was run was last November. Looks like Jesse ran it. And so let's see the results of this job when it got run. And there were no new courses, no updated. That wasn't what it was. It was a rollover. So you can see new courses rolled over. And we open that up and we'll see really simple. It's got the new course code. It's got the original course code. If there were sections, they would be in there. These were all successfully rolled over to the new courses. And of course, you could look at the individual courses. You could do a search in Alma and start reading the courses. But that's kind of the end. We've managed to get it to work. I mean, I'm stealing Jesse's old job when she ran it a couple months ago, but that's how you check on it and make sure that it worked the way you did. All right, let's go back to the slides to wrap this up. That is what I wanted to cover today. I just have a few more things to tell you. So if there was something in there that wasn't covered that you have questions about, now's your chance. Again, address them in the WebEx chat to all panelists so that both Jesse and I can see them. And I'll just finish up with a few bits of information. Again, in this document, this slide set that I have here, go grab the slides from the place where you registered for this session, because here are some of these links that go directly to documentation and training that will help you learn more about this. In fact, this first one right here, this course rollover and reset overview, this is basically what I've talked about today. It's to help you decide what kind of workflow is best for your institution. So it's just a document in the Knowledge Center that explains that kind of thing. There's also some training videos, a couple of short videos to watch to see the process of at least two of these workflows, the bulk rollover that we talked about today and the instructor rollover. There is a video on that process. And then there's documentation on more specific parts of each of these. The bulk and instructor rollover has its own documentation. Resetting reading list, so that third option for reusing a reading list has a whole page on that in the Knowledge Center. And then how to configure the course loading page. We were just looking at that documentation page a few minutes ago. And how to configure the normalization rules, specifically the one about reading list title. All right. We have a few minutes before the top of the hour for any other questions that you might have. And Jesse, what, if anything, has come in?
We have a question. I'll read it, but I'm also gonna paste it in the chat because it's a pretty long one and it's also a really great question. Kevin, I'll go ahead and answer this one, but the question is, what is the best practice for running the course rollover multiple times prior to the beginning of the term to add all the sections? This comes up a lot. You may run it and then, additional courses are added or additional sections are added as students enroll. Should subsequent rollovers include only the new sections, or is there a way to send all the courses each time without creating duplicates? And this is a very timely question. This was actually one of the NAIR's requests for this year. So the answer to this has just changed. I think it came out in either December or January. But on the course loader integration profile, where Kevin was showing the don't roll over courses created before this date. That's not exactly what it says, but it's something like that. He'll pull it up so we can see what it does actually say. Copy lists created before. This is actually how you would handle that. So if you are, before the start of the term, running the rollover job on a weekly basis, for example, what you would do is set this date to be the last date that you ran the rollover. And so what will happen then is when you run it the second time, you can use the full file. You can include the courses that you've already rolled over, as well as the new courses that have been added since. But anything that was rolled over previously won't roll over again. So that's really how this date works. Take a look at the documentation. It may describe it a little bit better than I just did, but this is how you would handle that scenario: is you'd put in the date that you last ran the rollover would go right into this field here. So great question. I'm sure you're not the only one who's wondered about this. I know some schools who've been doing the rollover for a very long time. We're spending a lot of time trying to clean up those files when they got the new sections, so you don't have to do that anymore.
Excellent, thanks. What else?
So far, no other questions in the chat. I'll just do sort of a general word of encouragement here to everybody. It is a lot of information. You know, you saw this very full session. It is it's a big job. There's a lot that you can do with this job, and it's a really powerful job. You know, when you look at this list of options about the way that you can roll over a reading list, setting this up is definitely worth the investment. There is an initial investment to kind of figure out what the right settings are for this job, but I'm sure you can imagine how once you start to do this, once you get this set up in the first place, you really are set up in a very nice way for the upcoming term. So as you have more and more courses in Leganto, more and more reading lists that you're working with, this really is a really powerful way to prepare those reading lists for the upcoming term.
Which makes a good point, Jesse, that if I was a library or an institution that was reluctant to start doing a lot of reading lists through Leganto Alma because of the pain of rolling over or resetting or anything, once you get this profile going, adding a bunch more reading lists doesn't add huge amounts of time. It's a little bit because you got to work on that spreadsheet, but you can handle it so much easier.
Yep, definitely. And especially when you consider some of these options that impact your workflows, things like, do you want previously, if the citations are already complete, they can be complete again. If the lists are already complete, they can be complete again. So, or they can be recalculated. Maybe you only review physical items and you don't want those to complete automatically because you need to move them back to your other shelving location. There's a lot of flexibility, so it's a great way to help streamline those workflows, and of course, really streamline the instructor experience too.
Great. If you do have other questions, folks, you can throw them in the chat and we'll try to address them offline, but you can also put them in the survey that's going to appear as soon as you close the WebEx meeting. That survey is really about this class and whether it was useful and if there's anything that we need to do differently. So feel free to fill it out for any reason at all, including literally asking us a question. Otherwise, I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next month, March 17th. And we'll talk about, I've already forgotten the next subject, but I hope it will be useful, and we'll see you then.
Talk about something really interesting.
Something really interesting. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.